Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It is time for our round one pairing, and we've got a treat for you. We've got Chris Iaali versus John Abanto. It's a Prism v Riptide, round one.
Spicy matchup to start things off. And what's really spicy about it, I think, is that we used to think both these decks were terrible, and now they're sitting very, very clean in the meta. So looking forward to this match and seeing how they pair. I don't know that I've seen any Prism versus Riptide matches. I've seen plenty of each, but not facing each other, and certainly not in a big tournament like this one.
Well, boy howdy, are you going to see a throwdown today, because we have two titans in their craft. Chris Iaali is no stranger to the stream at AGE. He is the captain of the Arcane Games and Events Pro team, and John Abanto is just an all-around good player. He's been playing Rangers since the Lexi days. I've taken a lot of advice from John. He and I faced off in the finals of a ProQuest at a Hidden Fortress. And I just have a lot of respect for that guy, and I know he's going to show us something special.
Sure. Do you know if he plays on a team?
I actually don't.
He's a solo dolo Ranger stan. Maybe.
Yeah, I believe he tangos with the San Diego crowd, if I'm not mistaken.
Got it.
I don't think I never see him wearing the Humongous Games shirt.
Well, we all know that San Diego likes to come here and just stomp out the locals at these Arcane Games and Events. San Diego just known for their flesh and blood talent.
Absolutely, and that's why Battle-Hardened San Diego is such an exciting event, right? All of these players who have been commuting basically every single month all the way up here to Lawndale are going to get to show us what they can do on their home turf.
Yeah, the San Diego locals, absolute menace of a group of flesh and blood players. Glad to have to share a state with them when we're doing out-of-state competition. That's who I'm rooting for, along with our Arcane Games team, of course. But when we're local, you know, I got to pick sides. And Chris Iaali right now, Arcane Games pro team captain. I mean, obviously, we want to have a good game. We want to see these players play their best. But, boy, am I a fan of Chris.
Yeah, I am as well. I would follow him anywhere, namely into Tier 4 events and so forth.
Yeah.
And he has been really taking a long time to decide on what deck he is going to bring to PT Amsterdam. And this is one that is at the forefront of his mind. Prism, Awakener of Soul.
And look at this. We see the Stonewall Gauntlet pulled out. I wonder if that means that Chris is expecting Riptide to have wide turns. That card really kind of needs the combat chain to stay open.
So Stonewall Gauntlet actually has a really interesting interaction with Bolt and Shot.
Right.
Usually Bolt and Shot is going to be coming in for 1 over its base.
That is such a good point.
You block with Stonewall Gauntlet, you take away Go Again, and end your opponent's turn.
Yeah.
Starting off the game, turn 0 goes to Chris Iaali.
Yep.
Incoming is Herald of Triumph at 7.
Yeah.
This is going to reduce the power of any poppers that John throws in front of it, and hopefully get into Chris's soul, get his first figment on the board.
Yeah, so this is one of the most important cards in the Prism deck. The ability to take those poppers, those 6 attacks that normally can destroy the attack and end the combat chain, those don't work against the Herald of Triumph. And so we see a lot of Prisms bringing this card in as an absolute staple to be able to have these wide aggressive turns that are really difficult to disrupt. And so we see John just coming out 3 cards blocking.
One of those critically is a piece of equipment. So getting an equipment block on turn 0 is Chris Iaali, and he's always happy to see that.
Yeah.
Following up the red Herald of Triumph with a yellow.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Chris leaving himself without an arsenal going into the rest of this game. Must not have really liked the tome at the moment, or that other card in the pitch, which I can't quite make out.
And so we see a full block. Interesting choice to use the equipment early, but I think it may just have to do with John wanting to be able to use it as soon as possible. With these battle-worn equipment that have a really strong ability, you want to make sure that you've gotten the value out of them before you crack them. And so John playing into the ability to possibly even use it on turn 1 as soon as possible.
Premeditate coming out from John, activating Riptide and reloading, incoming E-Strike. This is one of the powerful moments, powerful parts of Riptide's text, right? He can play a pump that only works on cards in Arsenal, reload any freaking card in his hand, and send it. So it looks like it's going to be an E-Strike for 10.
Yeah, and we were just talking about how the bread and butter of Prism is these Heralds of Triumph. Well, the Premeditate in Ranger is an absolute banger of a card. Creating that ponder token and allowing you to refresh the card and draw an extra one for Arsenal. It looks like he won't get the full value out of it because he has a card in hand right now, but those ponder tokens are so strong when you can use your full hand.
John gesturing to his Dreadbore saying, hey, you can't play D-Reacts from hand. Luckily, E-Strike is not an arrow, and so Chris is given the green light, or the yellow light, as it were, to play his Soul Shield. Looks like he's saving another one for Arsenal. Chris being a gentleman and showing that to us, so we'll know for the rest of the cast. Drawing back up, passing over to John. Let's see what John can do with a 5-card hand.
Yeah, I like the way that Chris played that out. I think that one of the difficult things for Riptide to do is be both extremely defensive and extremely offensive at the same time. Similar to the weaknesses of Guardian, sometimes you can just have a card of all D-Reacts, a hand of all D-Reacts, and that doesn't do very well offensively. So Chris playing patiently.
And perhaps John finding himself in that exact situation with his Arsenal, because he trenches away the Arsenal, gets himself a resource, uses it on that Dreadbore to load an Endless Arrow, and he's kind of flipping through his cards. I'm wondering if we're seeing a pretty buff light hand. We might see himself give Riptide an intellect penalty just because he can't send all those cards. Let's take a look at what's in the hand. Yes, we see a lot of arrows. We see an Intoxicating Shot. We see a Scar for a Scar and an Endless Arrow, none of which are going to have to go.
And there's the use of those gloves right away. So John just anticipating the potential for this and keeping the pedal to the metal, figuratively speaking, allowing this to come in for 9 instead of 4. Very important for Riptide to be able to keep the gas on when he has the tempo.
Unfortunately, fortunately, he got his block value early, but unfortunately, you're having to use this half glove really early, and this is usually a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right.
You don't want to find yourself in one of these clunky situations quite so early.
Yeah, this is a tough thing to use so soon. That's a very good point you've got there, Bryce. As we see Chris Iaali sending the Soul Shield out, allowing the arrow to hit, and I think he recognizes that the ability to get that back into hand isn't all that bad for him when John already has a card in hand. So the pseudo draw effect is not really effective in that scenario.
Exactly. Chris identifying the moment when the on-hit is not super relevant, and also noticing that the Riptide just hasn't been able to apply that much pressure. So incoming is another Herald of Triumph. This one for 6 should be pretty easy for John to block out, and it's critical for John to do so. The longer you can deny Prism her ability to tutor and activate her Figments, the longer you have kind of a fair game on the other side of the board.
You know, speaking of the game, I'm kind of want to zoom out a little bit and talk about what the sort of win conditions are in both of these decks, how they're going to play against each other. One of the things I think that John on Riptide can do is use those traps to ping 1 damage if the angels come out. So Chris is going to have to be very careful about playing out those ward angels and losing a lot of value swinging in and potentially getting his turn ended by one of those trap pings. So we see him really heavily focusing on the Herald game plan and churning through a lot of those Herald of Triumphs early on. This time we've got a Herald of War Tune Herald, excuse me, 1 for 6 in yellow, and this will have go again, I believe.
Indeed, we have a yellow card in the pitch. War Tune Herald is going to get go again. On hit, goes to Soul, finds Chris a Figment. He's got 2 cards in hand, so you know there's going to be a follow-up after this. The blocks are 2 cards from John Abanto's hand, covering it up nicely, and it's another War Tune Herald coming in right behind.
Yeah, so we have a very defensive match on our hands. Both John and Chris really sort of respecting their, or protecting rather, their life totals as Chris goes down to 27 to John's 38. Still hasn't been hit yet.
And it's soon to be down to 25 for Chris, probably. He's choosing whether or not to pitch to this Pitfall Trap, which came from the arsenal of John Abanto.
Yeah.
1 damage is taken by Chris for the Riptide ability, and then looks like he throws that last card that was destined for Arsenal into the pitch to cover up an additional 2.
So he ends up valuing his life total more than his arsenal, which is not always the case in a match of Flesh and Blood. But here it seems like both players have figured out that in this matchup, it's really, really important to stay healthy and play efficiently rather than trying to do aggressive plays where you're just taking a bunch of damage, because on the side of Riptide, you have the ability to ping with traps and do this true damage effectively that can't be stopped. So Chris needs to make sure to keep his life total high so that he has the resources to work with to end the game. And John, being the defensive deck and having all of these traps and tricks to shut down all of this highly offensive value that Chris can throw out, is also kind of playing into a similar game plan. I'm really curious to see how this ends up. If this is like a match of attrition, we may see this go into a sort of fatigue where we're looking at, you know, how many cards are left in your deck rather than how many life points do you have at the end of the game.
Certainly could be. Chris Iaali, first round of the Arcane Games and Events Open Series July. Still with no Figments on the board. We've got a blue Herald of Triumph coming in.
Yep.
John Abanto, unable to pop this with a 6. Thinking about a 1-card block, it seems.
Gives
Blocks
up the
2,
Scar for Scar.
And we have another trap.
Okay.
This is the Buzzsaw trap. This is one that John would much rather see on a Herald being affected by a Pierce Reality or some other pump.
Right.
However, in this case, it'll still cover it up and deny Chris that critical Figment generation. Followed up by a blue Herald of Protection coming in for 5, threatening both to Soul and a Spectral Shield token.
Yeah, it seems like part of John's game plan is starving the Prism of Soul. We can see that the Prism has 2 cards in Soul right now, but the more Soul the Prism gets, the more ability she has to set up the loop. And, you know, the, what is it? The
Arclight Sentinel.
Arclight Sentinel. Thank you. The Arclight Sentinel loop is one of the win conditions that Prism can set up. For those of you not familiar, Prism has the ability to recur Arclight Sentinel over and over again with the right setup. And this could be something that Chris is playing towards. If this goes to fatigue, that would allow him to basically keep sending attacks without expending too many cards in his deck to do so.
John Abanto sending over should be, yeah, it's an Endless Arrow for 7, pumped up by a Premeditate, and a Codex of Frailty on the board. Very powerful 2-card hand from John. Let's see how Chris decides to respond. So far, the block is 1 card. John is getting in by 4. Looks like the blocks are good. Chris takes 4. John generates an additional Ponder token, and also Endless Arrow comes back to hand. So John is going to have 3 different choices as to what he arsenals.
Yeah. That is a valuable thing for Riptide. His arsenal is so important, being able to send these traps and then reload them. And, you know, just his Riptide hero ability can get you so much value. As a Ranger player, I'm sure you know the importance of getting things into your arsenal. So
Rangers definitely care about their arsenal.
Yeah.
Back to Chris Iaali. Incoming is another Herald of Triumph. John is checking the graveyard because I'm pretty sure we've seen a Herald of Triumph at the beginning of pretty much every one of Chris's turns.
And that was something I was noticing earlier. You know, we talked about this card being so important when you're playing against a tech that can pop your Heralds. And seeing them all this early, I think on the one hand is really nice, but on the other hand, we're going to expect that later on in the game, those won't be available. Maybe John thinking about how that affects the way that he plays moving forward if he can anticipate them starting to dry up.
And Chris is probably just trying to get as many cards out of John's deck by choosing to prioritize these Herald of Triumphs, because it's always going to require a 2-card block.
Yep.
There's no popping here. There's no card efficiency on the blocking end. It also might force John to play those early 6 attacks when Chris is totally fine blocking them.
Yeah.
Murky Water, that's a card that you really want to hit if you can afford it.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And we're just seeing these players kind of trade cards rather than trading life. Of course, John has been able to deal some good damage to Chris. Looks like he's done 11 so far, so we're about a third of the way through the life total, whereas John has not taken any damage yet. So being extremely, extremely proactive with his blocking while still sending meaningful stuff. This is an 8 damage endless arrow with a ponder on hit and the ability to return it to hand. So he keeps sending these threatening attacks while completely stuffing Chris's ability to do damage.
This is John's final premeditate in the deck. He's played the other 2. Endless arrow coming in for 8. Also with Dreadbore text, this is not an E-Strike. Chris cannot play D-Reacts from hand. That being said, he's got 2 Soul Shields in Soul at the moment. The likelihood of him having the last one is pretty low. It could still be really awkward for Chris. Let's see if we can see what's in his hand.
Yeah.
We got Herald of Erudition. Looks
and
like
a Genesis.
Possibly 2 Figments as well. That's a really low block value hand right there. And Chris is forced to take it.
Yeah. So I think Chris knows that his win condition is going to be to build up that board, and the illusionist game plan typically likes to trade the life total for that board state in order to create momentum on their side. And we see exactly that as Chris gets the Genesis out, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful auras in his deck, which are actually very difficult for John to clear. He doesn't have a weapon, so he's going to have to send cards at that Genesis if he wants to clear it, which can give Chris a lot of breathing room on the other end.
And because Chris's life total is lower than John's, we've seen a lot of instances where John has drawn up Scar for a Scar, which is usually a dependable source of go again for a hero whose life starts below the base value that heroes normally do. In this case, he's not able to use that for go again. So having a turn that deals damage and removes an aura becoming more and more difficult for John.
Yeah. John really thinking here about whether or not it's worth it to block this out entirely. The 7 breakpoint is very difficult to deal with. If you give 3 cards here, can you even send anything meaningful back with the Genesis on the field? You're certain to lose tempo in a position like this.
And we're showcasing the power of Herald of Triumph. John's got 2 poppers in his hand, if I'm not mistaken. He's got Weakest Link and also Murky Water. That might be an Endless Arrow, actually.
Okay.
I'm mistaken. It's just 1 popper, but he's not able to utilize it here.
Yeah, he has not popped any of the Heralds yet, as these Triumphs just keep coming out and providing value. And we see him blocking with 2 cards from hand and his Balance of Justice, once again stopping the on-hit, but he is running out of equipment. He has just the boots left to block in the trench, which you really do not want to give up until the last possible moment.
I think Nathan Crawford said it best. If you're blocking with the trench, I would sometimes rather lose than block the trench.
Well said.
And John still holding on to the Perch Grapplers. Usually the use case scenario for those is one of those really threatening and scary Herald of Eruditions.
Right, which we did see, but Chris ended up putting that into his soul rather than keeping it, probably because he knows that it's not very useful as long as those boots are out on the field. I'm sure Chris is very happy to see the Balance of Justice taken. Now he only has 1 more piece of armor to get through before those eruditions become extremely powerful.
Unfortunately, Chris also had an incredibly awkward hand from a blocking standpoint when he was holding the Herald of Erudition. That was Genesis plus 2 other non-blocks. Another Codex of Frailty coming out from John. I believe this is the 2nd one we've seen so far. This time, he's got resources floating, so he's going to be able to find a much more threatening arrow or attack than Endless Arrow.
Yeah.
Possibly even a Weakest Link.
And it looked like he put a card on the bottom of his deck. He arsenaled it and then trenched it. Ah, of course.
That he did.
Very heads-up play there, being able to get a resource out of the card rather than just discarding it.
John finding himself a Battering Bolt, which is going to be quite the choice here because Prism has a lot of cards that are not actions. And if Battering Bolt connects, it's going to reveal Chris's hand, destroy all the cards in that hand that are instants or non-actions, and then make Chris pay for it.
Yeah, Battering Bolt is one of the strongest arrows in this meta. It's like a second copy of Weakest Link. It's so powerful into these heroes that have actions or instants that don't block.
Furthermore, in this matchup, specifically, it's normally a popper, as long as you're facing something that's not Herald of Triumph.
Very well-rounded card.
Chris discarding a Merciful Retribution in exchange for the red Herald of Triumph that he's put back into his arsenal because of John's Codex.
Yeah.
Incoming Battering Bolt is just going to be for 6. It's not affected by Dreadbore, because Dreadbore was just used as resource fodder to get a card out of John's hand, so he didn't have to discard it to Codex.
Yeah, that's a very critical breakpoint that John wishes he had, but the 6 power still pulling, 2 cards from Chris's hand.
And it totally makes sense. There's no reason for Chris to be losing more life here than he already has. John getting his Ponder token, resetting the arsenal for the next turn.
Yeah.
Chris likely going to activate Genesis here with that last card in his hand. Hope that he draws something that is resource worthy of that red Herald of Triumph in his arsenal.
Yep.
He's just hoping it's not a red right now.
And seeing this Genesis stay out in the field, it almost feels like all the work John has done to prevent these heralds from going into soul is being undone, as Chris now has 4 soul to work with.
Interestingly enough, Chris decides to IP himself. He did draw a resource card that could have been used for that Herald, probably thinking that the Frailty token just makes it not worth it to throw that Herald, because that critical breakpoint of 7 just becomes an easy 2-card block for John.
Yeah, having not done any damage to John so far, it's pretty clear that his game plan is very happy to give up 2 cards, 6 power Herald, and just get it out of the way. So Chris valuing keeping it for a more explosive turn later on and making John be the aggressor and show him that his hand actually isn't clunked up with D-reacts.
John Abanto kicking it off with a Trench activation and E-Strike. Mode chosen is likely Go Again. We don't know. Yeah, it must be Go Again because we don't see a 7 represented. He also activated Riptide static ability and reloaded a card, ostensibly an arrow to follow up.
That would make a lot of sense. We'll have to see which arrow when he reveals it after this block is declared.
This is a turn where John could be utilizing the Go Again from E-Strike just to put a little bit of pressure on Chris's life total, and then use that follow-up to remove that pesky Genesis that is stuck around for a couple turns.
Yeah, Riptide has to have a deck filled with a multitude of cards that sort of play different roles, but E-Strike is one of them that kind of plays all the roles at once. He's playing it right now as an extender, which is, I think, a term that I learned recently that really helps me understand kind of like what the cards do in this game. An extender allows you to obviously extend your hand and get more value out of what you're doing. And here we see John finally getting a window, thanks to the extender, of being able to not only pressure the life total, but also take out the Genesis, which is a very important thing to do if you're going to prevent that arcane, and there it is, the Arclight Sentinel loop that I talked about earlier.
This Arclight Sentinel, unfortunately, going to the pitch zone, not to the battlefield. Kicking it off with that red Herald of Triumph that has been sitting in Chris's arsenal since the Codex turn. This is 7 Go Again. John is going to really have to think about whether he wants to finally let Chris get a Figment.
Yeah, and critically, I think that Genesis was cleared just in time, because if Chris was able to get the Arclight Sentinel out, that protects the Genesis, and if he then has to clear it, puts the Arclight Sentinel into the graveyard, which is exactly where he wants it to be. So pitching it away means that he has to wait a little bit longer to see the next copy of that in order to start any kind of defensive loop that can keep him from losing more of that life now that he's sitting at 11 to John Abanto's 38.
We're finding John again with a handful of poppers that can't do anything against this Herald of Triumph. We've got a Battering Bolt, a Weakest Link, neither of which are going to really matter and in terms of removing this Herald. However, I do believe I see a Tar Pit Trap, and that will at least turn off the on-hit ability of Herald of Triumph, still preventing Chris from fetching one of those really important Figments.
Yeah, maybe we'll see John take the first bit of damage, as I think the thing that he really cares about is the on-hit. But it looks like he really does value his life total a lot.
And this is critical. Here comes Frailty Trap from John's arsenal. Not only is it going to ping Chris for 1, but it's also going to give him a Frailty token. So much for your beautiful breakpoint, Chris. This one's going back down to 6. But luckily, we can follow it up with another Herald of Triumph, another breakpoint. We might finally get there and get a Figment out on the board.
It feels like Chris is running 30 copies of this card. We've seen it every single turn, and now here twice in one turn. I mean, I know that he recurred one of them from the Codex, but my God, that's a lot of these Heralds, which is the toughest version of the Herald for John to deal with. We've seen him have a popper almost every single turn, just go blocking without doing the popping that it was supposed to do.
There is a reason that Prism players run the rainbow copies of Herald of Triumph, and it's this right here. So poppers are basically ineffectual. For that reason, I mean, personally, my Azalea deck for a long time was running 0 poppers, just because there's no point against Herald of Triumph.
Yeah. I'm really curious about this use of the perch grapplers. I don't know if there's a particular critical mass of soul that John is trying to avoid, but it seems like with 4 already, you know, allowing 1 damage to leak through might have been okay. I'm not sure if he's just valuing his life total or keeping that soul low, if there's a certain number that he's trying to avoid.
Well, critically, that soul means diddly squat if you have no figments out.
Right.
You have to use them as a resource for your angels. And if you can't get any angels out, you're basically just treading water until Riptide gets you down to 0.
And we know that Riptide has very good counterplay into the angels. Whenever a trap is activated, it can deal a damage, which will pop the angel. So it's interesting to see how much John is valuing preventing those figments from coming out in the first place.
A blue pitch for Chris Iaali. Looks like this is the turn. He's activating his helmet. He's finally going to be able to find a figment, draw a card, possibly have quite a wide turn. This could be the instance, now that Vestige of Soul is on, that we finally find that ALS and start probably not looping John yet, but maybe at least getting some space.
Yeah, I think Chris needs to have a Genesis on the field. I don't know if he needs to get it down right away, but at some point he needs to make sure that he has both the Figment of Rebirth, the Genesis, as well as the ALS. So if he's going to put that combo together, it's tough. He needs to make sure that he's got all the pieces and they come down together. He can't be doing one at a time and giving John time to clear it out.
Figment of Erudition is the choice off of the tutor from the helmet activation. Immediately, he flips it into Soraya, which is going to allow Chris to draw more cards when he attacks with this angel.
This is a very, very powerful angel attack. Basically, the angel version of Erudition as it draws the cards even before it hits. So there's no counterplay to this once it's on the field and attacking.
John immediately activating his Balance of Justice. He's already got his block value. He might as well get the card draw as well. Incoming is 4 Go Again from Soraya.
And this is the moment where I want to see if John has the trap to pop this. If he does, that is a huge, huge swing in his favor. And if he doesn't, and he doesn't have a good ability to clear this, this could be Chris's ticket back into the game.
We have seen a good number of those go-again traps. Oh, no, and he finds the perfect one. It's Collapsing Trap. Oh, this is going to completely discard Chris's hand, and then Chris is going to have to draw back up to -1 of what he discarded.
Yeah, this is the trap that John wanted to see this turn. In addition to, the very important part here is that the trap is active, which allows it to deal the 1 damage.
Yeah, which will destroy the Herald unless Chris has some counterplay into this. Okay, we're going to draw some cards. We're going to see what we can find. This is all in response to both of those traps that are still sitting on the chain. Furthermore, Tar Pit Trap is activated. So we have 2 damage coming in, 2 instances of 1. Chris is going to have to cover up both of them if he wants to protect this angel and continue this turn. Furthermore, even if he does, Tar Pit Trap is going to make it so the next attack action card doesn't have an on-hit.
Yeah. Absolute critical turn for John. The ability to shut down one of the most powerful cards in Chris's deck, and it just lined up perfectly for him. Chris is in trouble here as he's thinking about what his outs are, trying to figure out a way around this blowout as he's thumbing through his cards.
Yeah, this is a rough situation for Chris to be in, but on the other side of the table, this is the kind of turn that makes a Riptide player. This is the kind of turn that makes somebody come back to Riptide over and over and over again. It's Collapsing Trap on a really juicy go-again attack.
Yep, and we see him basically just pitch his entire hand. Wow, look at that. So critically, getting out the ALS in addition to, is that the Figment of Rebirth?
It's a Figment of Triumph.
Figment of Triumph, okay.
Yeah, reduce all attacks by -1. I'm not sure how Chris... Oh, I'm so sorry. The traps don't trigger because Chris is attacking with an ally.
That was not a weapon.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an attack action card. Wow, okay, that is good catch there, Bryce. So
Chris still got his power turn. Nothing got turned off.
Wow. Okay. That's a very, very, wow. So the Angels are very robust in that sense, as Chris gets to keep it and swing again.
So the traps will activate because they're sitting on an attack with go again. However, the text in Riptide says ping whenever you activate a trap, ping the attacking hero. There's no attacking hero here.
Okay.
That's how the semantics play into what we just saw.
Well, Chris, thankful for that, I'm sure, because that would have been a blowout. I think I'm a little bit happy that it wasn't, because now he's got a real fighting chance. His board just exploded. He had such good counterplay into that. He was about to have to discard his hand, and rather than John having the perfect answer, it was actually Chris that had the perfect answer to that blowout and just said, oh, I have to discard my hand. Well, I'll just play it all out instead. And now he's got one heck of a board as he's swinging and drawing cards and now flipping this figment of Triumph, thank you.
Showing us Victoria. Every time he swings, he's going to be able to choose to banish a card from Soul. If he does, John is not going to be able to pop much. Basically having Herald of Triumph's effect on the back end of it. But finishing out this turn is just going to be a Herald of Protection, pumped up critically by the Pierce Reality. This is going to land. If it connects, it'll give Chris a Spectral Shield and make it that much harder for John to snipe the Angels with these traps.
Yeah, and wow, the momentum just swung massively. 8 damage coming through. 2 Angels flipped on the board. Chris is effectively sitting at 18 now with those 2 ward.
Chris definitely establishing a board presence here, but still not looking super comfortable.
Yeah, he's going to have a few more turns of clawing his way back. He took a lot of damage to build this up, whereas John, he's only taken 4 damage through the entire game so far.
Let's take a look at John's hand. I think we might, we're holding on to a Pitfall Trap, which is difficult to use because you have to play it from Arsenal. Likely John does not, he does have a trap in hand, it looks like, which is going to allow him to reload off of Riptide static text, the Pitfall Trap, and play it out onto this chain. That one will definitely be pinging Chris and force him to choose to keep, whether or not he can keep this Angel around. Likely not.
Yeah, so those pings get so much value. And it looks like both Angels are taken out by those traps. So that is a huge swing for John. Really interesting that this Herald, which seemed to be, 8 power coming in, doing so much, actually kind of got his Angels killed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those things about the Prism Riptide matchup. Riptide has and we see a pop on the last blue Wartune Herald there. So as quickly as that board came, off it went.
Yeah, wow.
And this is showcasing why Riptide is kind of a pick in this meta now, right? Usually, Illusionists are just a non-game for Riptide. However, these new Illusionists, the way LSS has been designing them, gives Riptide the game to get there. It's a really interesting play.
Yeah, and here we're seeing another aura come down.
And this is a big one, Michael.
Judgment.
Merciful Retribution.
Merciful Retribution. The Merciful, is this the one that if you would deal a damage, deal an additional damage?
No, that would be Ode to Wrath. Merciful, this is the one that combos really well with Merciful Retribution. This one says anytime basically a Herald is popped or an aura, including Merciful Retribution, is removed, ping your opponent for 1. And critically, this works on all of those Outsiders tokens that Rangers love to give their opponents, right? If you give Chris a Blood Rot at this point, when it pops at the end of his turn and pings damage to him, it's also going to ping you for 1. But on John's side, we've got E-Strike with Go Again, followed up by a pesky Remorseless.
Yeah.
That's 5 plus 5, possibly more if the Remorseless connects. Chris, not going to allow it.
Yep. Chris going down to 5 life. It is looking rough for him, but Herald of Erudition, this man is not going down without a fight, as that now comes in for 9 with the double Pierce Reality on the board, plus 4 on top of that 5. And John, well, I'm not sure what's in his arsenal, but even if it was a trap, he's got a lot to cover up. He would need to get another trap in there.
What he really, really needs is a buzzsaw trap in Arsenal, and we already saw it play earlier. So we know that is not a possibility. We know that no Murky Waters have hit. However, a popper will do it.
That's true. Wow.
So unfortunately, the Herald of Erudition that could is no more. And Chris will have to just draw back up.
Yeah, he still is able to put that Herald into Soul due to the Merciful Retribution. Big, long text, a whole paragraph even of stuff that it does, which is what makes it such a powerful aura and allows him to still get the Figment despite the Herald being popped.
And Chris finding Figment of Protection, which will also supply him with a Spectral Shield. Incoming Dreadbore activation for a blue Infecting Shot, it looks like.
Yep.
Incoming 4/4. Critical Breakpoint, which can be covered up very easily by a card in that Spectral Shield.
Right you are, as Chris...
Back to the tank for Chris Iaali.
Yep. And we see a Fabled in his hand there.
That would be
Great
the Library of
Solana. Yeah.
Let's take a look at what else he's got. Looks like it's otherwise a very Herald-rich hand. So block value of 9 in this hand. Should be a pretty easy cover-up. Chris probably just thinking over the finer points of his turn.
Yeah, he needs to pull the tempo back and never let it go while he's sitting at 5 life. He has very little life to work with. Can't afford to be taking hits from those extenders and wide turns that John has been putting together anymore.
Interesting. We see the pitch for the Phantasmal Footsteps in addition to the Stonewall Gauntlet block. Stonewall Gauntlet is effectively going to block 2, one by the Spectral Shield, one by the Phantasmal Footsteps, which will stick around because that attack was not 6 or greater.
So it looks like he chose to do that so that he could afford to flip this Figment.
Which makes sense. That's such a clean use of your pitch card, right?
Yep.
And now Chris is going to be able to start off this turn again with a Herald of Erudition for 9, asking John once more. You got a popper?
Yeah, except that's not what he's doing. It looks like he's sending in this...
Oh, it's coming, Michael.
Figment of Protection here, or rather Angel. Really, really important at this stage in the game to get as many of those Spectral Shields out. He needs to be able to take hits in order to establish a board. If he's blocking with his whole hand, he is not presenting any kind of pressure. And he plays that out along with the great Library of Solana, a card that I don't think I've seen played since original Prism.
It has been making its way back into these newer Prism lists, and it is a force to be held. 5 Intellect is one heck of a drug, Michael.
Yep. 5 Intellect is impressive, and it also is very hard to remove. You have to discard 2 yellow cards. Not a lot of decks are running yellows, so the agency is all on Chris to basically keep it as long as he wants to.
An incoming Murky Water, which can just be covered up by the Angel and 2 Spectral Shields that are sitting on the board. We'll see if Chris wants to go that way. Chances are he'll be able to throw a couple cards in front of this. But yeah, we'll see what he decides to do. Obviously, this is the prospect of giving a 2-card block is kind of nothing when you have 5 cards.
Yeah. One point I want to make here is that it looks like Chris is out of soul. So even if he keeps that Angel around, it isn't necessarily going to keep generating him those Spectral Shield tokens unless he can fill that soul back up. But speaking of filling the soul back up, he's got the Light of Soul in his hand, which will allow him to pitch and reveal the top card of his deck. If it's yellow, it goes into his soul. As I'm saying it, it happens. So there's some more Spectral Shields on a stick.
He's also able to stack it so that the Light of Soul happens first, and then he gets the option whether or not to banish to Aegis.
Yeah.
Forgo again is the ask from Chris Iaali with 2 Spectral Shields on the back end.
And this is what I love about watching Illusionist games so much, is you think they're down and out, and then they keep just kind of clawing their way back into the game, building and building. Those Spectral Shields are life. So, you know, if he can get enough of these wards out, he effectively goes from 5 to 6 to 7 to, you know, +4. He's at 12 right now.
Having another discussion with John about the efficacy of this Frailty Trap against the Angel.
Right.
Once again, the discussion goes, this Angel is not a weapon.
Yep.
It does have Go again, but it's not going to ping me because there's no attacking hero.
Really, really important for Chris right now to keep his board alive. And I wonder if maybe that blowout from the Herald attack has him considering not sending Heralds. It would be an interesting adjustment.
I tell you what he is doing right now, Michael. He's drawing one heck of a lot of cards. Chris just drew 6 cards.
Wow.
And he was able to do that off of 2 Tome of Divinities, which only required a blue pitch. Why? Because Vestige of Soul is turned on by Light of Soul, which put a card into Chris's soul.
And I think right now he's swinging with this Herald because he knows he has 2 Spectral Shields. So John would have to have 3 active traps in order to get to his Angel. And, well, that's unlikely. So John just throwing out the popper here.
Unfortunately, it's against the Herald of Triumph.
And it won't work. And this is 11 damage, so huge swing. It could go into Soul and allow Chris to find another Figment to fill that board up.
At some point, if John is not careful, these Heralds are going to start connecting. And with 2 Pierce Realities out there, he is going to start taking chunks and chunks of life.
Wow, and look at that chunk. Down to 21.
And into the Soul with Herald of Triumph.
Yes.
Able to put another Figment onto the board. But boy, is that deck looking low.
Yeah, and there's the Figment of Rebirth, the one that will allow him to loop Arclight Sentinel, which, depending on how big the board is for Chris, could just be a death sentence for John, locking him out of the game while Chris just gets to swing with those Angels over and over again.
Because as long as Chris has an Angel on the board, that ALS loop is still a viable option. There's no way that Chris is going to be able to be fatigued when he can just swing for 4 every turn.
Yeah.
John has got to put pressure.
Something I want to point out, too, is that we just saw Chris search through his deck. Didn't look like he had a ton of cards left.
No, certainly not. Here's a good one of them.
Oh, it's Genesis. So that's an important piece. And it looks like he has everything he needs to get this loop off. So I imagine John has to take that Genesis out, or else it'll allow Chris to continually feed his soul, which will allow the rebirth triggers to happen over and over again. Man, that library is putting in work, though.
Library is an incredibly powerful card. Once again, 5 intellect is one heck of a drug, Michael. And Chris seems to be on it.
Did you see that in his hand? It looks like he has the Arclight Sentinel.
Let's take a look-see. Yeah, at the 4 of Chris's hand is the namesake card of this loop.
Yeah.
Arclight Sentinel, or ALS for short.
So, there it is. Swinging at the Genesis, giving Chris the power to just 4-card hand him.
Furthermore, pinging John for 1 arcane damage from Merciful Retribution.
Yeah.
Another way that Chris could effectively get there in the end.
Yeah. You thought Riptide like pinging? Well, so can Prism.
Back to Chris's turn. Looks like he's also got a Passing Mirage on board, which is critically going to make it so that even if John did have the 7-power popper, still won't work on that first Herald.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like I blinked and Chris's board state exploded.
That's the way it is with Rangers and Prism, honestly. You can never count them out. I've had some nasty games against Zachary Wallach, for instance, in our
great guy, great player.
Exactly, our traditional 3rd round pairing. The last one I did, I had a steamroll of a game against him, but he somehow was able to stick a Soraya, and it took me about like 5 turns to actually close this out when he was sitting at like 5 life, exactly as Chris is now.
And here we see it. The Arclight Sentinel gets played, as well as the flipping of the Angel of Rebirth. So it looks like he has all the tools to lock John out. 1 soul critically, which will allow him to at least get started with that. John needs to make sure that Chris can't keep getting soul, but he has the Merciful Retribution out, which means even if he pops, the Heralds are going to soul.
Exactly. And also, every time he pops one of those Arclight Sentinels, he's going to get pinged for a damage.
Yep.
So here comes the Angel of Rebirth, finding, what do you know, Arclight Sentinel.
Right on the top, and oh my god, Chris has pieced this together beautifully, managing to get all the pieces at 5 life, sitting there just, I mean, this looks impenetrable.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you already have an ALS sitting on the board and you know another one is coming. This is the moment where the Ranger player is feeling the death knell.
Yeah.
And I have to sympathize with John because I've been in this situation many times as a Ranger player myself.
Yep.
This is when the writing is on the wall and you felt like you were just a hair's breadth away from killing this illusionist player, and then they do this to you.
And John is just giving his cards over for basically free. You know, he has to protect his life, but then he can't use those cards on offense to clear the board.
And you're pigeonholed into this strategy of, okay, well, I'll give cards because I can't get offensive value out of them because there's an ALS on the other side of the board. Chris, once again, is without any cards in Soul, so he may be in a situation where he has to throw a Herald first, which is much less scary because of that.
But it just goes to Soul. Look at that.
Yeah, exactly. Because of Merciful.
I do think it's important to note, however, that it's not going into Graveyard. So that can stop the loop. As long as the Merciful Retribution is on the board, that's a very, very interesting point. So Chris may not be able to keep this up forever. And maybe John was actually very smart to allow that Merciful Retribution to stay in the field. It seems like it might actually be an out for him if he can stay alive through this onslaught. Chris has another one in his hand that he just drew, but after that, if that goes to Soul, then what?
That being said, incoming is another Herald of, Angel of Rebirth swing. One thing that Chris can do, first of all, is lead off with a Herald of Erudition that can't be popped for 9. Second of all, he can go and find those figments, if I'm not mistaken, with the Angel of Rebirth. So he can basically just switch to a game plan where his angels become ultra powerful, and those are his win con.
I see.
He finds Bologna, the Angel of War, starts pumping all those angels. He's swinging for, instead of 4+4 every turn, he's swinging for, 5+6 or 6+7, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually grinding John into the dust.
Prism is such an interesting deck to watch play. It feels like he's gone through like 3-4 phases of the game, starting out just blocking, looking like he's getting his teeth kicked in. Then he builds up this board, and then as John clears it out, it's like he switches from this ALS loop over to a new game plan, and it's honestly amazing to watch this.
Looks like Herald of Erudition has connected.
Wow.
I don't know if we have updated life totals yet. That should bring John down to 8, if I'm not mistaken. And here we go. Here's Figment of War. This is the one that is going to provide us a courage token. And once he flips, he's going to start pumping all these angels, the entire board all together.
And if John is, in fact, at 8, like you said, Chris is now in the lead. If we count the ward on his board, what is he? 5+4+4+2. We're looking at 15.
I'm sorry. We have 4+4.
There's another angel.
We're at 14. 12+2.
Okay. Well, his life total is high when you count that ward, and John's is plummeting.
Okay, and so just like I said, here comes Bologna.
Yep.
Archangel of War gives a +1 counter to every angel on the board. So now Chris is going to be able to say 5+5, which, let's not forget the 9 that came before this with 2 card draw on top of that. He's also sitting on 2 ALS in hand. Chris is feeling pretty darn good in this spot.
Oh, yeah.
Here comes Battering Bolt. Not doing much popping here, only doing some blocking for 3. Likely followed up by another angel here from Chris. He's not going to be able to activate any banishing from soul effects, but Chris is A-okay with that at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, John's in trouble.
Yeah, John's in a lot of trouble. This is a situation that few Ranger players can ever crawl back from. Forget the fact that Chris is at 5. Forget the fact that there's maybe 5 cards left in his deck. He's sitting pretty. John in the tank, thinking about which card to give.
And just, short answer is, oh boy. Arclight
Hey,
Sentinel.
John, you thought you'd be able to pressure this board? I think not. Here's an ALS.
Yeah. And we can just see every piece of the puzzle for Chris synergizing with itself. So much value coming out of that great library, out of the Arclight Sentinel, out of the Merciful Retribution. And John doesn't even get a choice. The only thing he can do is kill the Arclight Sentinel and say, okay, well, at least you can't recur that anymore.
And it's not and if that wasn't enough insult to injury, the ALS goes to Soul and pings John for 1, getting him closer and closer to the grave.
Yep, and if it's not this turn, I think it'll be the next one as Chris swings once again with this Angel of Bologna, pumping all of his angels up. 2 counters on each. They're now coming in for 6 damage and 4 wards sitting on the table.
Chris showcasing, 1, how powerful this Prism deck can be, 2, how adept of a player he is. Because if you think this was just by happenstance, absolutely not. This was pitch stacked. Chris knew that this was going to be coming back around. We're probably in like 3rd or 4th cycle at this point.
Sure.
And Chris was not connecting with a single Figment. I think he identified that John was basically just going to block him out through the early and the mid game. And so Chris said, all right, cool. Well, I'll just set up like an insane double tome turn.
Right.
And you'll be wishing you were dead anyway.
Wow. That is a good eye on that. I think the second cycle is something that has fallen a little bit out of favor in this meta with so much aggro, so much Zen KO coming through. It's not often that the players get to showcase their ability to set up a game plan for that second cycle. But here we see Chris has not forgotten the power of being able to remember what you've done while playing a game of flesh and blood.
John, prospectively going to be taking 2 here, which is very scary with Merciful Retribution. Okay, we send the Inertia Trap, which will trigger here.
Yep.
Finally getting rid of something on Chris's board, but it's just going to be a pesky Spectral Shield.
The Spectral Shields protect him so well, and that's the game. Chris Iaali closing it out against John Abanto, round 1. Fantastic game from both of these players.
Chris Iaali finding himself very quickly below double digits on life and saying, no more. I am not giving you 1 more iota of space. I am going to stonewall you right here, throw some ALSs at your face, and then hurt you righteously.
Chris Iaali is such a wonderful player to watch. It just amazes me the way that he pilots these decks. It seems like he brings something new every single month and just shows us how to do it. So congratulations to him for taking that win.
Yeah, that is my team captain right there, and it is such a pleasure to watch him play because, boy, howdy, does he know how to play this game.
And don't forget to D-Chi, folks, or in this case, D-Angel.
Yeah, there's precious little time spoken about D-Angeling.
Yeah.
Chris showing how to do it. Boy, howdy, was that an interesting match, Michael.
Yeah. I've never seen that matchup before, and it was so interesting. It really looked like the Riptide just had Prism's number. I know that people talk about how powerful Riptide is when he goes into decks that pump and go again, and that's all that Prism does. In addition to the ability to ping and destroy angels, it seemed like maybe Riptide had all the tools he needed to just absolutely wipe out the Prism, but Chris showed us that, like, no, I just have to take like 30 damage, and then you're done.
Kiwi Stalker in chat says Chris Iaali belongs on the banned and restricted list.
Oh, absolutely.
I've had a couple games, Kiwi Stalker against Chris, that make me feel the exact same way.
Unfortunately, he's such a good person that I don't think LSS can find a reason to ban him yet. They would love to, just to get him out of this meta so that the other players can have fun playing the game and not get crushed every single time.
I don't know. I could find a reason.
Well, fair enough. Those are the behind-the-scenes stuff. No.
All right. Before we get to round 2, we have our metagame analysis for you. Let's take a look at what the AGE players are playing today. Looks like, wow. Speaking of our beautiful green man, we got 4 Riptide in the mix. All tying Zen, supposed best deck for representation.
Sure. This is really interesting to see. I think obviously, you know, we had the ban which pulled a few players off of Zen, and then looking at it, we've got New here who's kind of supposed to be the Zen counter, but like not enough Zens to counter, it seems like here. So really interesting to see the number of news coming out. Although I will say, I think one of the reasons we see so many news across the meta right now is because New is just such a fun deck to play.
That's the scuttlebutt, or that's the skinny on the street.
The skinny on the street, as the kids say.
Gen C says, you bet.
Yeah, no cap.
My Riz is, I can't keep this up anymore.
Skibbity what?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I am not an assassin player myself, but everybody that turns to that deck just gets hooked on it because it's such a blast.
I mean, I've played New, and I gotta say, the way that LSS designed this this mystic assassin. Oh, man, she is an absolute delight to play. Complicated, interesting lines, tricks. You know, I feel like it's a combination of like Arachne and Dorinthia plus her own kind of flavor, the ability to fake a reaction and then go, actually, this is a siren's call, and now you have to give me even more cards. So slippery, and being the snake that she is, I think that's very thematic and just grabs a lot of attention. But in addition to the Riptide, and the Zen we see at the top, we see 3 Azaleas, 3 KOs, you know, 2 more of these kind of like A-S tier bubbling heroes. What do you think about them coming into this tournament today?
I think they're sitting pretty, as it were. Riptide is showcased as kind of a really good pick here.
Yep.
Based on the top representation here, I think his new matchup is fine.
Yeah.
His Zen matchup, I mean, can be hairy, but that's the case for pretty much every hero in this meta. Usually Riptide is positioned very well into ninjas, so I think he's not upset to sit across from them.
Sure.
But also Azalea and KO can be really juicy matchups for Riptide. I think Riptide might be the pick based on what I'm seeing.
It really seems that way. I don't know exactly how his Zen matchup is, but I mean, obviously we know that Zen turns on a ton of his traps, and that's exactly what Riptide wants to get that value. But of course, Zen being Zen, I think anyone who thinks they counter him can sometimes be sadly mistaken as he pops off for 40 damage in a single turn.
And that being said, I'm also really excited about all of these smatterings of one-ups of other
so
heroes.
Beautiful.
I think I know who our Teklovasan is. I think that is Mr. Connor Davenport, and that guy has a lot of reps on that deck. And I think he could be really well positioned here based on what I'm seeing.
What do you think are his decks that he wants to avoid as he fights his way through this tournament?
Probably the Azaleas and probably the Zens, honestly. The Zens are probably just going to blow him out.
Sure.
However, if he runs himself into a new, I think he's feeling okay, especially because if he can make that game go long, then obviously he pops off with Singularity and does his thing. Furthermore, New doesn't have a whole lot of blue cards that she can banish from Teklovasan that she can actually play. None of those Evos. Furthermore, Teklovasan can play those Evos from banished. So I think Connor could just sweep all the News here and find himself in top 8.
Yeah, really good meta pick to bring the Teklo into the New. We also see Levia, who is almost, I would say, the opposite of New in the sense that they're both very powerful decks, but Levia is a tough one to pilot. And I think that is one of the reasons that we see what I would argue is an A-tier deck maybe being underrepresented in a tournament like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Levia's power level has only crept up as newer and newer sets and expansion slots have been introduced into the game. The most curious hero representation here, I think, is the Viserai. And I think you know something about this Viserai player.
I do.
Tell me.
He's my brother. Yeah, he loves Runeblade. He was a Briar main, and he has not quite been able to give that up. Dabbled a little bit in KO. Doesn't quite do it for him, so he's back on the Viserai. He just loves that sort of feeling of swinging a rune blade, you know?
Split damage.
Absolutely, the split damage, the aggression, and the flavor. I think he is maybe the only person I know that could possibly be more excited for Rosetta than I am.
Well, the time has come for our round 2 pairings, so we're going to take a very short break and be back with more Flesh and Blood after this. Don't go anywhere.